Welcome to a special edition of the Jake Feinberg Show. The entertainer. The one who stares into the distant fantasy. The one who can block out the distractions of the mind and knock on the golden door. The one who can outstamina everybody else in the room, dripping through a purple izod and pointing to the promised land. The one who can love and take care of their fellow comrades, even when they are ailing and ashes all fall down. The one who can perform on big and small stages for the better part of 5 decades. He has gone on tours of the Rocky Mountain West and stopped over in Santa Fe. Never too lazy to crow for days, my guest has continued to evolve and grow as both a musician and a person. His gumption and perseverance sings out of sight and offers inspiration to those who seek paths toward further consciousness. And he's coming to Tucson, performing at the Fox Theater, February 27th. Bob Weir, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show. How are you, sir?
Just fine, yourself.
I'm doing great. It's an honor to talk to you.
All right.
I wanted to start by asking you, this tour coming up, it also features Jonathan Wilson. And I wanted you to talk a little bit how the two of you met and if this is the first time you guys are collaborating musically.
You know, the first time I remember meeting him, we were doing, I've got a little studio up in San Rafael, California, and we do webcasts out of there. And I don't remember who offered him up, but somebody suggested him, and we just brought him on a show that we were doing. There were a number of musicians on that show, and he was just real good. He knocked my socks off, so we got to be friends, and we played a fair bit together. And we just decided to do a tour.
You know, I was going to say, because he is, I was reading some of his biography, and really a younger cat, but devoted to vinyl records. I mean, very passionate about the authenticity of records. And I'm not familiar with his music, but how does he, if you're playing an acoustic show, are you playing rhythm and is he playing lead? How does he fit in musically to what you're doing?
Well, we trade back and forth the leads and stuff like that. I mean, it's an acoustic show. He's going to do a set solo by himself. Then I'm going to do a set solo by myself, and then we're going to do a set both of us. And you know, like I say, we'll trade leads back and forth, both vocally and guitar, and just kick it around.
And that will be February 27th at the Fox Theater, a very nice venue, recently renovated actually as well.
Right.
And, you know, venues have always been fascinating to me, and I'm curious how much they meant to you personally. Whether it was the Heaven Help the Fool Band or Bobby and the Midnights or Wasserman and Weir, how integral to the spiritual quality of music have venues been to you?
Well, I'll tell you, a really nice venue makes a big difference. Most particularly the sound in the room. For me, makes a huge difference if I can hear the room back and it sounds good. And most if not all of those old Fox theaters are in that category. And the old Fox theaters, you just can't beat them. And then if on top of the room sounding good, it's an amazing Rococo palace of some sort, then that's sort of the cherry on the sundae.
Absolutely. Bobby, I've always, I've been fascinated since I've started my program, that, the element of street education that many of the musicians from your generation got. And there were opportunities to learn outside the constraints of the classroom, whether it was West Marin or all these venues that were going on in the Bay Area, getting up on stage and being yourself, having accessibility to your heroes like Reverend Gary Davis. It wasn't that you guys were were ignorant. Far from it. It seems to me that experiential learning was more at the forefront. And I was hoping, could you talk to my audience about your own street education and where you had the most growth in your early career as a musician and a person?
I guess probably I had my most growth listening to records, where, of all sorts, old blues records, jazz records, classical, whatever. Listened to a bunch of old records. Then we all lived together for a couple of years, the guys in the band in the Grateful Dead, and so we would all listen to music together and talk it over and stuff like that, and pick stuff up from what we were hearing, and then we'd end up playing that stuff. And then I also would learn a lot from just being with other musicians, seeing them, watching them play, listening to them, playing with them in particular. You can watch a musician and listen to a musician playing, but if you're playing with them, the learning experience really clicks in a whole new way.
And specific, you took lessons with Reverend Gary Davis, is that correct?
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's what, because Bobby, as I've read about your early, life, I mean, having this stepfather who really, you guys never vibed well. You were sent off to this boarding school.
Actually, we did vibe well. I was sent off to boarding school because I got booted out of the best school around where I was living. It was a behavior problem.
Right, but it was undiagnosed dyslexia, right? I mean, and then...
Well, no, I was also a yahoo.
Of course. Oh, no, and the thing is that... but when you went to the boarding school in, I think, Fountain Valley, is that correct?
Yeah.
And then you came back to Marin, and the opportunities to play with these old blues players, guys that really lived it, John Lee Hooker and the Reverend Gary Davis. How much did that make you feel more comfortable as a person? That to me, that is the evolution of humanity is a central theme to my show. And, I look at you as somebody, as a young musician, especially in the early 60s, to be able to sit there and say, wow, these guys have no teeth, or whatever, So talk to my audience about how you evolved at that time.
Well, I got an eyeful, I'll say that. When I was studying with the good Reverend, he lived out in Queens, and I would go and get a lesson or two when I was in New York, and I'd get a ride out there. And he required that. He lived in his house in Queens, and his wife strictly forbade him from smoking, in particular, smoking and drinking. And so, when we came out there, we would. It was, I got tipped off by Jorma, who also sat at the feet of the good Reverend Jorma Kalkinen, and it was kind of well known that if you wanted to get a good lesson from the guy, what you did was you would bring a box of cigars and maybe a hip flask of brandy, and you bring him a couple of good cigars and a slug or two of brandy, and also he required that you bring a cute bit of fluff with you, a comely young girl, a slick young filly, and he could tell.
Yeah.
And I mean, he was blind as a bat, but he could tell. And the old boy would perk right up, and you'd get a much better lesson that way.
Well, was he teaching you?
And he lived, by the way, he lived in, he did his lessons. He gave his lessons. He lived more or less in the basement of his house, so I think it was well ventilated, I guess, because the cigar smoke didn't get out of there to upstairs to where his wife would have at him.
Yeah, I was going to say, because she didn't like him smoking cigarettes or anything, so he was smoking cigars. He must have been able to conceal that.
Yeah.
You know, going back for a minute, what kinds of records were you guys? You go to Reed's Records. I remember talking to Bill Champlin, and Village Music was sort of this big record store, but that was later on. And it seems like Reed's was really the one in Berkeley that was big. And I'm wondering, you know, what kinds of jazz records and what kinds of music were Pigpen and Jerry, yourself, what guys taking in?
Well, back in the 60s, you didn't have to go to a special record store. Well, first off, we had our record collections that we'd been gathering since we were kids, and they more or less traveled with us. So we had a bunch of old records. And then, you know, if you wanted to get a blues record, it was, you know, some of the great blues records, we got them when they first came out, where they were current, and we'd sit around and listen to them, and most of that stuff was pretty easy to pick up. Most of the stuff that the band was doing was pretty easy to pick up.
When you think about the idea of playing with musicians, even now, the idea of playing with new musicians, it exposes weaknesses that you may not have been aware of. And with someone like Jonathan Wilson, or, you know, could have been whoever, how do you approach the idea of saying, well, or how did you get to the point where you were saying, you know, I'm secure enough with myself to know that I don't know everything, and I'm actually going to, I have to expose my weaknesses in order to grow?
Well, you know, at some point in pretty much every tune, you have to, unless you're playing by road, at some point in every tune, you have to decide, okay, I'm going fishing. That I learned early on. And so, you know, there's always a little lump in your throat when you do that, or a little, you know, your heart in your throat a little bit where you're doing that. But at the same time, that's where the fun starts. You know, when you hook a line, when something that you're doing sits up and begs. And the guys you're playing with hear that, and then they respond to that, and then you're off to the races.
I only ask because one of the more dynamic periods that I listen to it consistently in the car with my daughter every day. You know, when you put together your own band, Bobby and the Midnights with Al Johnson, Billy Cobham, you know, I'm thinking, you know, the Grateful Dead in general, a lot of the music, you know, came completely organically, and the rhythm section was quite dynamic in its own way. But when you met up with those guys, I'm curious as to how it helped you understand your strengths and weaknesses, and how did you take these newfound truths and bring them into the musical construct of the Dead? Because when I listen to 83, 84 Dead, I hear serious growth in your instrumentation.
Well, most of that came from just playing a lot, and those guys, you know, they Al Johnson, Alphonso Johnson, and Billy Cobham, and the rest of the guys in that band too. They had a lot of ideas, and they're going to push you in new directions, almost necessarily, unless you're, you know, brain dead. And that said, you're going to pick up a whole bunch of new stuff. Just by trial and error, if nothing else. And then, you know, I was also listening to other players and stuff like that. You know, we'd put tapes on the bus and pick up stuff that way as well. And it was just, but really it was just from playing a lot that the more you play, the better you get. Practice makes perfect.
I was just hoping you could go back for a minute and talk a little bit about Jeff Hasselberger and
Yeah, sure.
and this idea, because when I interviewed Bobby Cochran, and he very fond of you and loved being with you as a buddy and also a player, and those Ibanez guys basically fused that band. So I was hoping you could talk about Hasselberger and kind of how you guys got to know each other and how everything took off from there.
Well, the evil Dr. Hasselberger, we met backstage in Philadelphia. I don't know how he got backstage, but he introduced himself, and he was running the Ibanez or however you pronounce that. I guess assembly plant in, and he was doing the marketing and all that kind of stuff in the artist relationships for Ibanez in Philadelphia. It's a Japanese outfit, and they make guitars in Japan, up in the mountains. It's really a nice scene they've got up there. This old Japanese woodworking tradition. They make real wonderful guitars, and he was the marketing guy and the artist relationship guy, and or artist relations, I guess they call that. And he's also a real fun guy. He plays guitar himself, not badly, but he's a real sharp business guy. And we just got to be friends, and we started designing guitars. And then through him, I met Bobby Cochran, Alfonso Johnson at the NAMM show, the National Association of Music Merchandisers. They have twice yearly, I think. And one year, he brought a bunch of Ibanez endorsees together, and we made a band. I think Steve Miller was involved in that, and Alfonso Johnson, and I think Billy Cobham was playing Tama drums, which were marketed by the same outfit, and Bobby Cochran, and we made a band. And now Steve already had we made a little band, and we had a pretty decent jam there. And then Steve, now he already had a band or two, and so the rest of us just decided, okay, this is a lot of fun. Let's take this on the road.
I would love to know what more. Some more. Would I like to know what I want you some more? Yeah, some more. Like to know more. Hey, don't you worry, what more? What
mind, was that sort of serendipity that it all kind of came? Because, you had a transition period where, in the Dead, Donna and Keith left and Brent came in, and then you had this opportunity. You were doing two things at one time. Do you think that because Bobby and the Midnights got kind of really red hot at that point, it kind of made the Grateful Dead organization step it up as well? I mean, I feel like that Bobby Cochran said that it was really sort of an awakening for you, and I'm curious, as you look back on it, how you feel it helped you evolve.
Well, I just brought a lot of energy back to the Dead when I was doing that. So that probably in itself helped step things up. And then Jerry was also doing his Jerry Garcia band at the time. And so we were both just playing all the time. It was wearing us both a little thin, but still we were playing a lot. And that just helps everything.
Your studio is called Tri Studios?
TRI.
TRI.
Tamalpais Research Institute.
Say that one more time?
Tamalpais Research Institute.
That's right. Can you, do you have, what were your expectations, if any, when it first came out? And has it met your expectations, and what would you like to continue to see happen?
Well, I just started building it. I had no expectations. Now, it's as good an audio facility as you're going to get, as good a video facility as you're going to get. Actually, as an audio facility, it has one feature that nobody else has. We have a room in which there are 80 speakers soffitted around the front, back, and sides, and a bunch of high-quality microphones, a couple dozen of them hanging down in the room, and the microphones hear everything that happens in the room and take that up through software, and then put it back out through. They run it through software, and we recreate any of a great many acoustic environments. From a living room, a small club, bigger club, small theater, larger theater, hockey hall, shed, cathedral, ballpark. You can emulate the sound of any of those kinds of places, and then you can play with that. And so it's a real treat for musicians to play in there, and it pulls performances out of people. Anyway, the idea is we built that with the idea of broadcasting, because I'm into live music. But you can make a video in there. You can make a record in there. You can do whatever you're doing. What I'm doing currently is on Wednesdays I do a little show, hour and a half, something like that. It's called We're Here, and generally I have a guest or two on, and we just play and we talk and stuff like that. There's a little part of the show where we just kick stuff around.
Who have you played with recently that you enjoyed?
Well, just recently I played with a guy named Jason Crosby, and who was Dave Schools, bass player from he lives out here now, bass player from Widespread Panic. Jason Crosby's played around with a lot of bands. He plays keyboards and fiddle. He's got a 6-string fiddle that he plays. Wow. And he also plays guitar and sings. And I had both of them on pretty much individually a couple of weeks previous to last week, and then last week I had them both on at the same time. Also, we had Shauna Morrison, who's Van Morrison's daughter, and she can sing. And we had a lot of fun with her. And that kind of thing. Jonathan Nelson is coming up next week. I've done one with or Jonathan Wilson. Excuse me. I've done one with Lucas Nelson, who's Willie Nelson's son, and he's real good. And then it gets foggy. I can't remember. We've been doing it for a little bit.
No, I mean you're locked in. We're talking to Bob Weir, and his acoustic show will be here February 27th at the Fox Theater. It's a Southwest run for Bobby, and it's interesting to me when I look back. The Heaven Help the Fool album that came out, a lot of really, really credible musicians, but when the Bob Weir band came together in '78, it was this rhythm section of, I don't want to butcher his name, it's John Masseri, but it's, some way it says Mouser, but it's Masseri, Rich Carlos, and another guy, Brent Midland. And I'm like, where did Bobby, because none of those guys played on the Heaven Help the Fool album, yet they were in the Heaven Help the Fool band. So help me understand how that happened.
I went fishing, did a lot of auditions and stuff like that down in L.A. while I was making the record, and just after, while I was mixing it. Because the record company wanted us to go out and work the record, promote the record, and so I put together, while I was down there, I put together a band. Most of the guys, in fact, all of them were out of the LA area, which was hot at that time.
Was Brent? I thought Brent was from the East Bay.
Well, yeah, but he was down in LA at the time.
And what did you? They were very tight rhythm sections. So I mean, you just felt like they would be. It just seemed like a natural fit.
Yeah. Well, I went through a few musicians and picked the guys that fit together the best.
And then ultimately, you guys start to tour, and I listened to quite a few of those shows. I was born in 1978, and when I listened to these shows, you guys are having a ball, and my daughter and I, we listened to Poison Ivy, and it's just so great. It was so fresh. Comes a point where you're on a Northwest tour with the Garcia band, and I'm always trying to figure out, did you make the decision to have Brent come into the band, or did Jerry hear him and say he might be a good fit? I'd always kind of
actually Jerry heard him and said he might be a good fit. Let's try him out.
How did you feel about Brent? Did you feel extra pressure? Brent coming into that kind of a daunting task. He didn't go through the acid tests. He was, sort of in a non-culture in the East Bay. A great cat, a warm guy. But did you feel sort of almost a big brother kind of like responsibility for him? Did you have to kind of look after him? And it kind of how did that early transition to the Dead work?
Well, there's only so much you can look after a guy, you can big brother a guy. But yeah, a little bit I did that. Just tried to make sure that he didn't, get hit with too much too soon. I'm not sure how well I succeeded with that, but I gave it my best.
Well, I mean, my favorite period of time is the early 1980s. You were in tip-top shape. I think the mountain biking.
Yeah.
I think your ability. I read somewhere about I don't know where you learned this, but you were just you became a master chef. You love cooking, so you took care of yourself while Jerry sort of began to let things go. And Phil talks about it being the Heineken years, but yet when I listen to the power of the band at that time, it does strike. I'm always curious to know, when you looked over at Jerry, he was 300 pounds, very bloated, his voice sounded terrible. Was your heart breaking? Did you feel a responsibility to say, hey man, cool it? I know you guys did at some point, but especially in that 82, 83 period, was it let each his own, or were you kind of always there to kind of help? Because it's my favorite period. But for many people, they look at it and say, "Oh, I mean, it's the dark days."
Well, those were dark days for old Jer. But we were there for him. Like, for instance, when we were on the road, I was Jerry's bag man. I guess I can, I carried his dope for him, so that
yeah, right on.
So that he wouldn't. I apportioned it out, and I was sworn to him that I would only give him so much a day, and that was that, and that was that, no matter how he tried to weasel it out of me. And it was an interesting time, but we actually tried to bring him around, and that just didn't work. He had to go through. He had to have a total breakdown to get him off the stuff, and so he went into a diabetic coma, basically, and strangely enough, that brought him around. He was in great shape for a little while.
Yeah, I always look back on it as a guy who never saw. I mean, I've seen Rat Dog, I've seen you perform, but I never even saw the Grateful Dead. But I am such a passionate fan, and actually more of a jazz guy. I mean, I've interviewed Bernard Purdie and Bill Cosby and
right.
David, all sorts of different music, and the Dead. Everybody always assumes, or they say, oh, it's a psychedelic rock band, but actually, I come at it from a jazz perspective. The idea that all you guys were soloing, improvisationally at the same time. And when I first listened to the Dead, I didn't really understand it. I was just getting off on it. But after really inundating myself with lots of jazz, I realized that, my gosh, how absolutely difficult and organic a process it really was for you guys to be clicking on all cylinders. And it's incredible that you did it as much as you did.
Well, practice makes perfect. It was rock and roll Dixieland, basically.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
this road. The rainbows spiral round and round and tremble and explode. Let the smoking clear of my mind and like to blown away. The heat come round and busted me for smiling on a cloudy day. Coming around, y'all. Coming around.
Sometimes I listen to the early, some of the early stuff that you and Barlow put together. How much did work did you do with John Perry Barlow in Wyoming, or was it most of it done in Marin County?
I'd say the bulk of it, the lion's share of it, was done out in Wyoming. We were, stuck together in a little drover's hut miles from the main ranch house. It was just a tiny little log cabin, and we got a lot of work done out there. It was just us.
Bottle of whiskey, sometimes on the floor, brawling it out. I remember reading somewhere where you guys would just duke it out and then, come up with some lines,
Right.
The interesting thing is, I've heard you say before, you're sort of an anarchist, not really a political person. When I listen to Throwing Stones, though, how did those lyrics come about? What was the whole genesis behind that? Because I actually think that those lyrics, while in the early '80s, the malaise and the dysfunction was already seeping in, and the sort of backlash to schools and education and with Reagan and all that stuff. So it made sense. But now when I hear those lyrics, more prescient now than ever before. Where did those lyrics and where did that song come from?
Out of the blue. I mean, stuff just comes to me. That's all I can tell you. I don't know, but it does. It's unfortunate that it. Excuse me. It's unfortunate that it is as true now, or even maybe more true now than it was back then.
Right. You were quick to say that you don't mind something like a revolution. You don't mind things that come along once in a while that sort of, flex the system and stir things up. But you also say, if it lasts too long, that's not a good thing. So, in your mind, where do you still strive to grow? I mean, is it as a father? Is it as a musician? Where are those areas of cultivation that you still that you feel a need to grow in?
Most of the music, and trying to establish a meditation practice.
How is meditation? How does that work for you?
Well, on a good day, it works well.
That's wonderful. And I have to be on the record because it was an interesting time. Were you guys flying commercial in the early 80s, 82, 83? You guys, theoretically, Jake Feinberg could get on an airplane and you and Lesh and Midland would be hanging out there?
No, by that time we were flying charter planes.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Bob Weir coming to the Fox Theater February 27th of this year with Jonathan Wilson. It's going to be an acoustic set from Jonathan, an acoustic set from Bobby, and then a joint set. Sounds like several hours worth of music.
It will be, yeah.
Well, we look forward to seeing you, Bobby, and I got to tell you, it's an honor to talk to you, and look forward to seeing you down the road.
All right.
All right.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.
This is the Jake Feinberg Show, and we'll see you all next week.